Hello everyone, today we'll be talking about the problem of evil. The problem of evil it was originally made by Epicurus, but it's not really made by him because everyone acknowledged this and it's probably as old as the idea of God. Well, the problem of evil is very simple. God is supposed to be omnipotent and yet all good. However, in the world we encounter evil, we encounter diseases, we encounter death, we encounter evil. If God is omnipotent, then He will not allow this. If He is all good too. However, i- however, because we encounter evil, that means that God cannot exist. God is either not omnipotent or not all good. But first of all, why is this important? And this is very important because this is a problem that every one of us faces, that every one of us gives an answer. And ultimately, the problem is about to be or not to be. Is it worth this world to exist? Is it good that it exists? Or it should have never been? Because if the the immense amount of suffering and pain and evil, how can God allow this world to be created? Because of the evil of the world, it would have been better to have never been, to have not existed. Or, despite the evil and despite the problems and the suffering, this evil, this world has to exist. Is good despite of all the problems we find, and that God is yet all good despite the evil. So it's something really important for all of us, and all of us give an answer. So let us go to the point. Let us hear the problem of evil, various formulations. Okay. So in the first formulation will be very simple. In the world we encounter many examples of morally evil human beings. If God existed, he will not let them to exist. And we find these serial killers, these serial murderers. We encounter Jeffrey Epstein, Charles Manson. We encounter people who are really evil, who commit many atrocities and many evils. However, if God exists, why does he allow this moral evil? The second will be the natural evil, which is again, we encounter diseases, earthquakes, tsunamis, and much pain and suffering that is not made by an agent, but by the structure of the world itself. We encounter bad things like death, disease, having to kill other animals in order to survive. The third argument, which I really like, which is made by William Rowe, is the idea that in the world we encounter extreme, gratuitous suffering. Because the theist, the Christian, for example, he can say something like, well, God allows evil in order to bring a greater good. However, we encounter in the world sufferings that do not appear to give a greater good. For example, imagine animals being trapped in a fire and they start to slowly suffocate and suffer and burn until they die. But instead of dying immediately, they take hours, even days of extreme suffering with no apparent reason or not an apparent meaning. If God was omnibenevolent, all good, he would at least give them, I don't know, a quicker death, a death without so much suffering, because all of this doesn't give anything good at all. It's just extreme suffering for no apparent reason. And if the extreme suffering exists, that will mean that God does not exist. The fourth one is the indifference hypothesis made by Paul Draper, or is the evidential problem of evil. What is trying to say? Let us think in zero. Zero is all the presence of evil and suffering we encounter in the world. and you can here see the funny man of the mustache. You know him. What is his name? Well, we encounter many evils like this, and murderers and killers and all of that, and much examples of wars. We also encounter the suffering of animals. Now, imagine that before being born, an angel comes in the womb of your mother and says, "Hey, when you are born, you will see a world made by an all good, omnipotent God that loves his creation." And then you're probably thinking, "Wow, man, that is gonna be amazing." And then you're born. And what do you find? Well, you find diseases, you find war, you find this funny guy, you find murderers, you find all of that, and you say, "Well, it doesn't really make sense, right?" That is what you will think. However, if the angel will come to you and say, "Hey, you will encounter that this world is not made by an all good being, that he's not omnipotent, and that he doesn't care. He doesn't care for it. He just created the world and that's all." And then when you are born and you see the war and you see the suffering and you see this funny guy, you will think, "Oh well, the angel is right. It appears that the one who created this world, he doesn't care." And that is the argument. If this idea that God is indifferent or non-existent, the presence of evil, it's not surprising. However, if he does exist, then we will be impressed, right? That is called the evidential problem of evil. Now, then we also encounter the problem of animal suffering, which there is a very good video made by Cosmic Skeptic on this problem, and I think that is a very good argument in actuality. In the world, we encounter way too much animal suffering, especially under evolution for thousands of years. Remember that. The world has thousands of years of existence, and the animals too. And they have been evolving and killing each other and eating each other during thousands of years, and that involves a lot of suffering. And there are not many arguments in order to appeal to animal suffering, because many of the arguments for God are free will, or that God allows evil in order that we mature. However, an animal cannot do that. An animal is not rational, but yet he's sensitive. He feels the world and he suffers a lot. So why do this, right? Okay. I think this is all the arguments of evil, the the many formulations I could find, and I find them to be very good, especially the problem of animal suffering. I think is the strongest formulation of evil. Now let us go. Now we will hear the answers, okay? And the general response to the logical problem of evil is the following. As Thomas Aquinas wrote in the Summa Theologia, it says, "It seems that God does not exist because if one of two contraries be infinite, the other two will be altogether destroyed. But the word God means that he is infinite goodness. If therefore God existed, there would be no evil. But there is evil in the world, therefore God does not exist. It's the highest good, he will not allow any evil to exist in his words, unless his omnipotence and goodness were such as to bring good even out of evil. This is part of the infinite goodness of God that he should allow evil to exist in order to produce good." What is the very smart theologian saying here is that Aquinas is saying that yes, evil exists. However, God can bring a greater good thanks to the evil. So the evil is part of the world, yes, he allows it to exist. However, that evil can bring a greater good. And because it can give a greater good, it is better that evil to exist. For example, let's say that someone hurts me, and then I forgive them, and they repent, and they mature, and they become a better person, and then we become friends. And that is even better if he had never insulted me or injured me. Because if he had never do that, I could not forgive them, and I could not enjoy the happiness of looking at a bad person, turning it into a good person, and now doing good. Redemption cannot exist either, because that is only possible if you were evil to begin with. And the same thing for forgiveness and for justice. All of those things would be impossible if there at least was not the capacity of evil to exist. And therefore, the logical problem does not exist. It has been refuted. Because it's not logically impossible. But you are still thinking, wait, but there are still a lot of problems, there are still a lot of formulations. And yes, I agree. But the logical problem does not exist, meaning that it's not necessary that God does not exist. God can exist despite all the evil. However, you would say, well, it is not really rational. And yes, I would agree with you. Atheism then would be more rational and a better theory than theism. However, this does not mean theism is impossible. Okay? Let us continue. And here Saint Augustine will say something very crazy. Will say, well, in actuality, evil does not exist. What? Let us read. Evil has not been made by God, for he is all good, but it's a byproduct of the lack of goodness, or privatio boni. Therefore, just as darkness, evil is nothing more than the lack of light, evil is the lack of good. For example, think in knowledge. Knowledge is good, right? And what is ignorance? Well, it's not having knowledge, right? But ignorance, it's not really a thing. It's just lacking the good. In this case, knowledge. So, in that sense, evil is nothing more than the privation of something good. But it's not really something there in the world that you can say, hey, this is evil. Not really. It's just the privation or the lacking of something, like a donut. For example, you see the donut, and Augustine would say, well, the donut is good, right? However, that hole in the donut, it's not really something, it's nothing. But you can only see it if the donut is there, right? So what Augustine is saying, well, the evil, it's like the hole of the donut. It only exists as the privation of the good. And in that sense, it's a byproduct, but not something that God created. Now, you can, of course, reject this idea, or not, or not. But the important thing that Augustine is trying to say is that if evil is the lack of good, it's not something that God created, but it's just a byproduct. It's just something that exists because there is good. Just like darkness. Darkness only exists because there is light, right? Because darkness is nothing more than the privation of light. So it's not something that God created. It exists, but not really in the metaphor, not metaphor, metaphysically. It's not something that ontologically exists in reality. And therefore, the problem of evil is refuted by Augustine. Now, we will look at Aquinas again because this bold, smart guy, I love his bald head. Mwah. Thank you, Aquinas, you are very smart. Let us read him. He says the following: if God exists, where does evil come from? However, it should be argued the other way around. He's turning the tables now. If evil exists, God exists. For evil would not exist if the order of good disappeared, the privation of which is evil, and such an order would not exist if God did not exist. Well, what is Mr. Aquinas trying to say here? Aquinas is taking the idea of Augustine and taking it even further. He's saying that, yeah, I agree. Evil is the privation of good. However, evil only exists because good exists. Just like there is darkness only when there is light. And therefore, ultimately, it depends on God, because God is what the theologians call the summum bonum, or the greatest good. He is the cause of everything that is good in the world. He is their source. And therefore, if there is evil or a privation of good, that would imply that good exists, and that good implies God as the summum bonum and the cause of good. and therefore the existence of evil would prove God's existence. Ah, very interesting. Now, let us keep reading. The third argument would be a critique of the evidential problem of evil. Because, yes, we cannot disprove God because evil exists. No. You can only say, well, it's less probable that he exists. But let us put into consideration that idea. Let's take into consideration the problem of gratuitous suffering. And the problem of this is that it's judged under our limited knowledge of reality. Because we are not omniscient, we cannot know if God has sufficient reasons to allow suffering that are not known by us. Therefore, we cannot know if gratuitous suffering exists. What I'm trying to say here is that we are not in the epistemic position to say that, hey, this evil, it's useless. It doesn't give any good. It has no purpose. Because you can be cheated by your wife and you say, well, she has broken my heart, she has left me, and that has not give any good, no purpose at all. It's stupid. And say God does not exist. However, you in the future, because your wife cheated on you, you can become a better person and you can start to empathize with people more, and you start to, I don't know, start to give charity, you start to turn to the poor because you have suffered a lot, and then you see these people suffering and say, well, I don't only want the best for me, but I want the best for them. And then you start to caring for others because back then you were obsessed with your wife. So while yes, what she did was evil, it can bring a greater good that you do not know in the moment because you are not omniscient, but God will know it. And that good can only exist, I don't know, 10 years after. But it's there because of what happened. Let us give an analogy. Let's say that there is a farmer who loses a horse. Then the town says, oh man, that was terrible. I'm very sorry. But then the horse returns 3 days later, followed by other two horses. And then all the people of the town are like, wow, man, that was amazing. But then the son of the farmer falls from the horse and breaks his legs. And the people of the town says, man, that is horrible. I cannot believe it. And then a war breaks out on the country, and the son does not participate in the war because he broke his leg and he saved his life. And then the people of the town are like, wow, man, that's amazing. You see the problem? Is that the people of the town cannot know if what happened was good or bad because their knowledge is limited. Only God can see the full picture and know what evil to be allowed because he knows what is the greater good at the end. And that is something that you cannot forget if you are using probabilistic formulations. Okay? Now, other kind of argument that it has been used for a very long time, and but that has been taken into more consideration by Arvin Plantinga, by his words, is that humans have free wills. Okay, is that they are rational beings with the capacity to choose and to reason on their actions. And because they can reason, they can discern what is good and what is evil, they can choose to either do good or do evil. And why God would create rational beings is that he would create rational beings that they freely choose to love him and to accept him, or to reject me, or reject them, or reject him. Because it is better to create someone that freely chooses to love you than to create a robot that loves you, because a robot cannot really love, right? He's just doing his program. He's just doing what he's fabricated to. However, a free person can love, can choose to love, and therefore God will be not logically incompatible with evil, because many of the evil in the world that we see, it is only created by men. For example, wars, murderers, betrayers, killers, born of war, all of that, it's purely by men. And let us look at a natural evil like diseases, or let us look at being poor, hunger. All those problems they are natural, yes. However, men can do good, and men can give charity, and can support the poor. Yes, I'm not saying that the natural evil does not exist, that it is not a problem. However, men are responsible to do good and to help others despite the natural evil. And that falls under the idea of free will too. And take into consideration the idea of Aristotle's is that plants, for example, they are nutritive, they only eat. Some there are some plants that can feel too, but that doesn't matter. Not the majority. But when you look at animals like dogs, monkeys, and all of that, you see that they feel, that they can touch, that they can hear, that they can smell, and all of that. However, they are not rational. When a dog kills a little child, we don't we don't judge the dog. We don't say, "Whoa, this dog is evil. Let us take him to court." No, of course not. Why? Because the dog is not rational. He cannot use his reason. He cannot discern between good and evil. However, man can do that. Man can understand the world. It can discern what is right and what is wrong. And this falls under the idea of free will. Now, another argument is the soul making, or the greater goods, that was also used by Thomas Aquinas. Well, the idea is that God allows evil in order for humanity to do greater goods. For example, bravery only exists if there is fear. Justice and forgiveness only exist if someone hurt you. Love can only exist if there is some kind of doubt. Because if you love someone without some kind of doubt, or without the choice of saying no, I love them, despite that there may be reasons that they do not love me, but no, I'm gonna have faith that they love me and I love them despite whatever happens. That is only good if there is some kind of doubt, right? For example, charity can only exist if there are poor people, people with hunger, with pain, and all of that. So, all of those goods and virtues are only possible if there is pain and suffering. And let us remember that in Genesis, Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. But uh, then he was freed he was freed as a slave and became the governor of Egypt. And when he became the governor, he also helped people when there was a famine, when there was hunger. And he started to do a lot of good things and eventually redeemed his brothers, and the brothers repent of what they did, and he forgave them. And what did he say? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about it is as this day to save many people alive. So yes, while his brothers did an horrible thing by selling him into slavery, God did something greater by making him a governor and saving people when there was a famine and there was hunger. So yes, God can work through the evil to bring a greater good. Now, let us take into the argument of the indifference of God. And the problem of this argument is that it doesn't take into consideration all the information. Because imagine now the angel comes into your womb and in the womb and says, well, this world was created by a all omnipotent being that is all good, that he loves his creation, but he also created his creatures with free will. And some of these creatures and individuals will choose to do evil, to reject him, and they will gain political and economical power, and they will bring many evils. like the funny, the funny mustache guy, right? The funny looking guy. We see him. He only brought all of those evils because he gained the power to do it, and the people let him gain the power too. So all of this is fault of all of the people, right? And that is something that the angel cannot not say it. Because it is also not taking into consideration the idea that God also desires the creatures to develop virtues, to sacrifice, to give charity, to forgive, to do justice. It doesn't take into consideration all of that. When you take into consideration all of this, you realize that this idea of indifference, it is not really that strong, because it's working with false ideas. It's not giving all the information. And because we could also give other kinds of evidence. Why not give evidence for God? We encounter that human beings are rational, that therefore they also have free will, that they experiment religious experience, all of them. There is not a single nation of all of the world that has no kind of religion either, or a religious experience. They all share this idea of transcendence, this idea of love, of justice, of forgiveness, of God, of the divine. They also experiment morality. And they experiment morality like something that is real in the world, right? That there are good and bad things in the world that are not to subjective opinion, but that they are truly wrong and truly right. That killing a child is something wrong, and that is wrong seen by all the people of the world. That thing in itself is bad, right? At least that is how the majority of people experiment morality. All of this makes more sense under the idea of a good God that desires to have a loving relationship with his creatures, right? All of that makes more sense if God is all good. So therefore, this idea of indifference is not taking all the information, right? And that is the problem. Now, the problem of animal suffering, the most strong formulation. And something that we have to take into consideration is that animals do not suffer like human beings. Why? Because, as I already explained with Aristotle, they are not rational. They cannot think abstractly. When an animal suffers and, for example, watches his mother die, he doesn't think, "Oh God, why did you kill my mommy dog?" The dog doesn't think that. The dog just saw his mother die, but he doesn't have all of this abstract idea of my mother and my loving relationship with my mother, or why God you allow this, or why is the world like this? I'm gonna hate the world. I'm gonna hate existence. No, the animal does not think like that. It doesn't have reason. It doesn't abstract reality. He only experiments reality. And yes, he has emotions, but only sensitive emotions. He cannot choose, for example. An animal cannot love either, because a dog doesn't choose to love the female dog. He only feels lust for her and the emotional connection to her, but not a choice of love, because he doesn't have reason. And because of this, the suffering of the animals cannot be compared to the suffering of the human being. And they also do not have free will. They cannot choose. They cannot experiment morality. All of this, while it doesn't reject the idea that yes, there is a problem, because it is a problem, but in actuality, it is much less than what it seems. Because yes, if dogs and kittens and all the animals we find were rational, yes, this will be a nightmare. No doubt about it. We do not even eat animals. because it would be like hitting another human being. Don't you imagine that? That would be horrible. But there is a clear difference. I do not feel bad by killing and eating a cow, but I would feel very bad if I were to do that with a human being, because a human being has reason, unlike the cow. And that is a very big difference that you cannot forget. Now, let us look at the second version, and that is the idea that God's creation is chaotic, but the purpose of such chaos is meant for humanity to reign over creation. This is an idea of the Bible that I think it's very civilized in the sense that yes, animals they are savage, they are uncivilized. There is a lot of pain in the world. However, human beings can work in order to bring a greater good. Yes, there are poor people, but human beings can create houses, can give food, can create what's it called? Well, can be farmers. That I forgot the word, but you get the point. They can work in order to bring a greater good. And yes, the animals they are savage, they are killing each other, they are living in their instincts. However, human beings can domesticate them. They can give them better lives. They can make them more civilized. For example, look at the wolves. The wolves became dogs, and the well, it's not the lions, well, not lion, the tigers, the cats, the savage cats, they became kittens. They become the cats that we have like pets, and all of that is something good that we humans brought to creation. It was there, it was chaotic, but we gave them a new purpose, a purpose that is this better, and it says good of us for what we did. So that would imply that God's creation can be perfected if human beings chose to love Him and chose to do good. That is why it's so important. So yes, I think that will be a sufficient response, but the problem is still strong and it's still problematic, I will say. Now, something that cannot be rejected or not taken into account is the idea of heaven. Now, I don't know if um, this argument is possible under the idea of just the belief of God, meaning theism, but it is in Christianity. And the idea is that, as scriptures say, God will wipe away every tear from their eye, and there shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying, there shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Now, if heaven exists, and the people who choose good, and chose God, and love, and do good things, all those peoples, they will go to heaven and they will experience a reality of joy, of love, of communion, and that reality is eternal, because that is when all of creation will be wiped out of its evil. Now, in that case, you cannot just say, "Oh, the evil of this world it's too much," because you also have to take into consideration a eternity of pure good. You can also think, for example, as an analogy, think of a recent born child, of a newborn child. The child is just suffering, is just crying, he doesn't know what has happened, he just came out of the womb, and he just full of fear, right? It's a horrible experience. However, later on on his life, he doesn't remember that. Or when you have a nightmare and you die in the nightmare, you don't remember. You only remember a little of what happened, and you don't really like feel it to as a natural reality right now. So in that case, if heaven exists, The suffering that you find in this world, it will be a similar experience to that of the born child, or to the suffering that you had in a bad dream, in a nightmare, if heaven truly exists. Now, I'm not saying that heaven justifies evil. Of course not. It doesn't. But it reduces the problem. And that is the point. The whole problem of evil becomes a whole with a whole new world of weaker, of tinier than when it was. Because yes, a child will be born, he will suffer, he will be mistreated by his parents, he will be tortured and die at 5, and that is horrible. However, that child will have an eternity with God, an eternity of love and communion. Does that justify the evil? No, but it reduces the problem, and that is the point of the existence of heaven. It reduces the problem of evil, but you cannot just explain all the problem with heaven. No, it won't work. But it reduces the problem. Now, another example is the idea of Jesus Christ. And it's important to look at this photo because this photo was made in the Soviet Union. And it was a trial to God. They killed, symbolically of course, they cannot kill a God, but they killed God because of its crimes to humanity. Why? Because of the existence of evil. That was the symbolic act. But let us actually think of Christianity. Because Christianity is very special. Because Christ is God in human flesh. And he was completely good person, completely innocent, and he died for your evil, for my evil, and the evil of all of this world, including the funny guy that I showed you. Now, can you look at Jesus, at this God, and say, "Hey God, you do not know what it feels to be betrayed. You do not know what it feels to be killed. You do not know to feel to be hated when you are completely good and innocent. You have never experienced that." And you would have a point. You would have a point if you were talking to the God of Islam or the Jews, the Orthodox Jews, but not towards the gods of Christianity. Because the God of Christianity, he suffered, and he was betrayed, and he was marked, and he was completely innocent and all good. Yet he suffered all of that. The God of Christianity cannot give you arguments, cannot give you philosophy class, but he can tell you, I know. I know what is to suffer, and I know what is to be killed, and I know what is to experience pain. I know all of that. And I believe that is something much more stronger than any philosophical argument. Because if God suffered like a human being and died for the evil of the world, then in that case you cannot say that God does not know about the evil of the world. He knows. And that's all he tells you to in the act of Christ. He's telling you, I know. And in my opinion, that is sufficient. Because that is enough to trust him. In the words of Rabbi Yitzhak Gratuitous when he was talking in the book of Job, quoting God, he says the following: I'm not going to answer the question. I just want you to know that I am here. I want you to know that I am with you. That as you walk through the dark tunnel of life, there will be so many things that you won't understand, and so many things that don't make sense. But I am not here to intellectually give you an explanation. I am here so that you will feel the reality of my presence, and that in your suffering you are not alone, and I will be here to give you strength, to give you resilience, and that it's going to be enough. In other words, Job was looking for an answer, but he found God, and God did not give him an answer, but God took away the question.